It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. Those of us who call Iowa home certainly know that we live in a farm state. But a new report suggests most of us have no idea just how industrial that farming has become. The Environmental Working Group is a nonprofit advocacy and research organization that tracks chemical safety, consumer product ingredients, and agricultural subsidies. It's best known, perhaps you knew it for this, its consumer guides like the Dirty Dozen produce list. The Environmental Working Group spent the past year having a look at satellite imagery in every corner of Iowa, manually counting barns, measuring roof lines, and estimating herd sizes, facility by facility. And their conclusion, more than 15,000 large-scale livestock operations statewide are generating over 107 million tons of manure every year. Enough, the researchers say, to equal 33 tons of waste for every single Iowan. That's thousands more operations than Iowa's Department of Natural Resources has on record. So why the gap, and why does it matter for the water flowing into our rivers, into our lakes, and out of our kitchen faucets? Last week, I spoke with Ann Schechinger. Ann is Senior Director of Agriculture and Climate Research at the Environmental Working Group. She's also co-author of this report. Later in the program, we're going to have a representative of the Iowa Pork Producers Association. Ann, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me.
Start off by telling us a little bit about the methodology here. How do you exactly count a hog barn from a satellite photo? Walk us through what your team actually looked at image by image on those satellite images.
We used the Iowa DNR's animal feeding operation data file really as a starting off point for identifying locations of animal facilities. We checked every data point in the DNR's file to see if they were still operational from visual indicators in aerial and satellite imagery. But then we really expanded upon the data in the DNR's file by manually scanning 2025 aerial imagery that came from the USDA. And we used EWG's long-established methodology for identifying which types of animals are raised in each operation. So we actually look in the imagery and are able to see, based on different visual cues of an animal facility, what type of animal is produced in that facility. And then every barn that appeared to still be active in the imagery was actually measured. So we measured the building footprints and digitized the square footage. So we were able to measure in our geospatial software and figure out how large these facilities were, and then calculate actually the number of animals in all of these facilities. So we started with DNR's data, but then we really expanded upon that. And that's how we found a lot more facilities than what's in the state's data.
What you're describing reminds me a little bit of how we ascertain facilities in foreign countries via spy satellites. But I guess why measure the footprint of a barn rather than just relying on a farmer's or the regulator's self-reported numbers here?
So only certain facilities need to be reported to regulators. So in Iowa, if you have more than 500 animal units, you have to have a manure management plan. But any facility that has a smaller number of animals than 500 animal units does not need to have a management plan. And in this case, an animal unit is 1,000 pounds of animal weight. So like one cow is around 1,000 pounds, 2.5 hogs are around 1,000 pounds. So that's what equates to an animal unit here. But we know that Iowa DNR's data only has animal facilities that are over 300 animal units. So it was important to us to go and look at all of the facilities in the state, not just the facilities that are being reported in the state's data.
Mm-hmm. Your count comes in thousands of facilities above what the Iowa DNR has on record. Tell us the numbers there, and then tell us, where do you think this gap comes from?
So our count is that the state of Iowa has 15,309 animal facilities as of 2025. And in DNR's data, they have around 11,000 facilities in their data set. And a big part of this is that, their data only has facilities over 300 animal units, and ours has every animal facility in the state that's above 50 animal units. So we really go down to find almost all of the facilities in the state besides, backyard chicken farms and some of these very, very small farms we don't have in our data set. And just to add too, in addition to having smaller farms, we don't know when DNR's data is updated. So it's very likely we have facilities that they have not included in their data set yet as well.
Okay, 15,300 according to your data. How confident are you in these estimates? So if someone says, you're just guessing from satellite photos, what's your response to that?
We're definitely not guessing. We have been doing this animal facility geolocating work for over 10 years at EWG, and we actually have a peer-reviewed methodology that we use to do the analysis. So we feel really confident in these numbers and know that this is not just guesswork at all.
Mm-hmm. So if another research team repeated your work, they would arrive at roughly the same answer.
They would definitely get too close to what we have. And we also are really willing to share the data we have. We've offered to send it to the DNR so they can, use our data with their data. And we are giving it to partners that are working on the ground in Iowa as well.
We're speaking on Friday, the 17th of July. Have you shared the numbers with the DNR? Have they responded? Do they dispute the numbers?
We have not shared the data with them yet because we are waiting for them to sign the data share agreement. That's kind of the legal process of sharing this type of data. So when they sign the data share agreement, we will happily share that with them. And we have not heard them dispute the numbers. They are aware they don't have any of the animal facilities in their data that are below the 300 animal unit level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if these facilities aren't all reflected in state records, what practical difference does that make? Why should those listening care?
So animal manure has a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen in it, and it's applied to farm fields near these livestock facilities. And we know that phosphorus and nitrogen have a lot of impact on water quality and then eventually on our health. So there's a very big issue with nitrate in drinking water in Iowa and other states in the Midwest as well. And we know every year Iowa also has a lot of algae blooms in a number of recreational waters. And both of those issues are tied to manure being applied to farm fields. So it matters when we don't know where all of the animal facilities are, because even small facilities producing and applying manure to farm fields can contribute to this water quality problem. And this is especially a concern in some areas like the northwest part of Iowa, where there are a lot of these animal facilities in one area. So if you have a really big facility that is in DNR's data and it's next to a small facility that's not in the data, that is important to know because the small facility as well as the large facility's manure are contributing to this water quality problem. So it's really important to get a holistic look at all of the animal facilities in the state to really understand the water quality issues that are happening.
We report a lot, of course, about nitrates in our water supply here in Iowa, cancer risk in Iowa, algae blooms you've mentioned. Connect the dots for us between a barn full of hogs and what comes out of our taps.
A hog facility would produce a lot of manure, based on the size. And then the thing about manure is that it is applied to farm fields as a fertilizer to help crops grow, but it's also applied to fields to dispose of it. These hogs produce a lot of manure every year, and it has to be disposed of somewhere. So it's applied to these fields, and then the nitrogen or phosphorus in the manure that's applied to fields gets into a lot of drinking water sources. So it can run off farm fields and get into streams. It can soak through the soil and get into tile drainage that's underneath fields and get into streams. Or it can get into sources of groundwater as well underneath fields. And so when nitrogen and phosphorus get into sources of drinking water, the nitrogen turns into nitrate, and nitrate leads to an increased risk of cancer when you are drinking higher levels, as well as birth effects for babies. And then on the phosphorus side, the phosphorus that comes from this manure and gets into water really feeds these algae blooms. So we see blooms across the state every single summer because when it gets hot, the phosphorus really feeds the blooms in the summer and causes them to grow. And those algae blooms can produce toxins too, which makes it unhealthy for people and dogs and wildlife to recreate in bodies of water that have algae blooms as well.
hmm And we have to take a break in just a moment, but very quickly. So we are not, to be clear, we're not talking about catastrophic manure spills. We are mostly talking about thousands of ordinary rainstorms carrying these nutrients downstream or through the tiles and so forth. That's what you're describing.
Yes, that's correct. There are manure spills, but the issue is an over application of manure on farm fields. It's just a regular part of farming and doing business as farmers.
Many rural Iowans and rely on private wells. Are their concerns different from people whose water comes through a municipal treatment system? We know in the Des Moines area, the municipal treatment at great cost can take the nitrates out.
For sure. So this issue of manure application and nitrogen in drinking water definitely affects private wells as well. But there is no real regulation on what's in private well water. So whereas those of us who live in cities and get our drinking water from community water systems, the EPA regulates community water systems and makes sure that the water systems stick to nitrate levels of 10 milligrams per liter or less. But with private wells, they're not regulated. So there can be really high levels of nitrate in these private wells. And oftentimes those levels can be much higher than that public drinking water limit of 10 milligrams per liter. And we actually at EWG did analysis many years ago of nitrate levels in Iowa private wells and found really high levels in a number of wells throughout the state.
We'll be back with more of my conversation with Ann Schechinger, Senior Director of Agriculture and Climate Research at the Environmental Working Group. She's co-author of a new report that shows many more large-scale livestock operations statewide than the DNR has on record. We'll be back in just a moment. It's River to River from IPR News. Back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kieffer. My guest for this portion of the program, Ann Schechinger, Senior Director of Agriculture and Climate Research at the Environmental Working Group, co-author of a new report that shows many more large-scale livestock operations statewide than the DNR has on record. They ascertained this through meticulous looking at every inch of Iowa practically with satellite imagery. Let's talk a little bit about policy and the economics here. To be clear, this is a systems problem you're describing here, not an individual farmer's at fault. I'm sure we have plenty of farmers listening to this conversation.
This is definitely a systemic issue. You know, the way that our federal and state policies are set up and the way that agricultural corporations work, it makes it so that farmers have to have more and more animals in their barns in order to make money. So this really isn't a failure of farmers, it's a failure of the system. And the government policies really incentivize getting larger as a livestock producer. And so it's really hard to have a small farm that just produces, a few hundred livestock and make enough money to survive on that income.
Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting in a pork producer's shoes, this expansion looks like a totally rational business decision.
Definitely. This is something that I'm sure a lot of pork producers consider, growing their operations because in the United States, this is how farmers make money, is to get bigger.
Mm-hmm. So what are your recommendations at the Environmental Working Group based on what you've found?
We definitely think there need to be changes in both federal policy and state policy that can help make this issue of, manure over application and water quality pollution from nitrogen and phosphorus better in Iowa and in other states. So, one change on the federal side would be to change how federal conservation programs work. So there is a federal conservation program that's called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and it pays farmers to do things like cover crops and buffer strips. But it also pays farmers to actually have livestock practices like manure lagoons or waste facility covers, which are really more just a cost of doing business for a lot of these farmers. So changing that program to prioritize funding to practices like cover crops, like contour buffer strips, that can really improve water quality would be really good, focusing on, sending money to regenerative agriculture practices that we know can stop some of this manure getting into water sources. So that's definitely a big one. And right now, there are House and Senate farm bills being considered. The House Farm Bill passed this spring, but the Senate Farm Bill is still being considered. So that's something that Congress could change right now that would have a big impact in Iowa. And then, on the state side, kind of a new idea would be to shift regulations of these animal feeding operations from the Iowa DNR more to county governments, because currently Iowa DNR manages how livestock facilities operate and expand. But shifting these decisions instead to county governments would allow the people who actually live and work near these facilities to have more of a say.
Mm-hmm. Is there an example from another state where you think that state has the balance more right than Iowa does?
So here in Minnesota, we have a very different system of how our animal feeding operations are regulated. We require a permit for facilities to a much smaller level than the state of Iowa. So you have to have a permit if you're below that 500 animal unit level. And then we also have required buffer strips between farm fields and waterways. So that has really helped reduce the amount of nitrogen that is getting from farm fields into nearby streams and rivers. So, some of the things that we do in Minnesota could also definitely work in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. If nothing changes in the next 5 years, what does Iowa's water quality look like, you think?
We've already seen the nitrogen issue just get worse and worse over time in Iowa, and we're still seeing those algae blooms happening every year. I don't need to tell, I'm sure, the listeners about what's going on in Des Moines, how people can't water their lawns because of nitrate issues that get their water from the water system. And these problems are only going to keep getting worse and worse if we do not really act now to try to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm. Critics, I'm sure you've heard this, say that your group, the Environmental Working Group, has long opposed large-scale agriculture, and that this is a report that simply reinforces your existing viewpoint. How do you respond to that?
I would say that what we care the most about is, the environment and public health, and doing whatever we can to try to improve those things, but not at the expense of farmers. Our focus has always been on fixing the system, fixing federal policies, state policies, and what corporations do. And so we really did this to try to help do that goal, to try to fix the system that really hurts the public and hurts the environment and also hurts farmers.
Okay, thank you very much. Anne.
Thank you.
Anne Schechinger, recorded last week, co-author of the report we're discussing this hour, Senior Director of Agriculture and Climate Research at the Environmental Working Group. Now live here, and if you're just joining us, we're talking today about a new report that's mapped Iowa's livestock operations from satellite imagery and found something striking. More than 15,000 facilities statewide. That's thousands more than Iowa's Department of Natural Resources even knows about, producing over 100 million tons of manure a year. The report's raising questions about water quality, why some operations seem to stay just under the regulatory thresholds, and perhaps who's footing the bill for the infrastructure that makes these operations possible. For the industry's take on this, joined now live by Eldon McAfee, an attorney with the Brick Gentry law firm in West Des Moines. He's represented the Iowa Pork Association since 1991. Before that, a dairy and hog farmer himself near Atlantic, and a graduate of the Lake Drake Law School. Eldon, welcome to our program.
Welcome. Thank you.
Anne's report that she just described and today's DNR, the registry data, all describe this manure as waste with real water quality consequences. I understand you see it differently.
Yes. Yes, I've been working on this issue, I guess, since I walked out of the cow barn into law school and then into representing livestock producers. It's not a waste. It's an asset. It's fertilizer. And obviously some of the things I'm going to say are very controversial, but you're hearing what I believe is the livestock producer's side of it. It's a natural fertilizer. It's not a chemical fertilizer. It's not a commercial fertilizer. It's produced by an animal. We believe it's a high-quality fertilizer, and the fact that it's stated how many tons are produced per Iowan and so forth, we think that's a positive that we're producing it here in the state of Iowa. It has to be used correctly, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But manure is an asset, not a liability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you make of the report's numbers themselves? You're not haggling with the accuracy. Do you think there's anything legally inaccurate about it?
I can't argue with the numbers. I'm sure those numbers will be examined many times over by others. I haven't had the time, nor if I had the time, that's not something I do. So I'll take them at face value for now. I do believe there's some misconceptions in the report regarding the regulatory side of it. It focuses on, I guess I'll pick out a couple of things. The fact that we don't have construction permits for anything lower, any operation less than 1,000 animal units, but those between 500 and 1,000 have the exact same requirements when it comes to environmental compliance for water quality, a construction design statement, a manure management plan. That's exactly what you have when you have a permit. And then we look to, okay, there's a question about the federal NPDES permits, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, and that the operations here, confinement operations, I'm not talking about open operations, but confinement operations don't get those federal permits. Why? That's a permit to discharge. You're allowed to discharge in certain cases if you have that permit. Iowa laws, ever since I started working on this in 91, with a confinement operation where the animals are confined to totally roofed areas, cannot have any discharge whatsoever, none. No matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, you cannot discharge. So therefore, the EPA has determined, once again, back in 2019, and we may discuss that a little more, that NPDES permits are not necessary in Iowa because of our stricter laws.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the practical difference there in what you just described? And does that hold up?
The practical difference, well, once the manure is applied to farm fields, and that's what I think most of us are talking about here, then you look to the manure management plan, and we realize that there are weather events. No one's questioning that we also have accidents at times, but I believe the focus of this report is on the normal application of manure. I guess this is where livestock producers with a manure management plan say, hey, wait a minute, we're the ones who are being regulated here. If you have a manure management plan that is required for any confinement operation at more than 500 animal units, you are limited by law as to how much not only manure you can put on, but on any 1 acre, you're limited to the crop uptake, and then there's also the phosphorus index, but you're limited to crop uptake. And if you put on manure, you can't put on more commercial fertilizer than is allowed by your total crop uptake. So we believe we're the ones being regulated here, those producers with confinement operations, hogs, cattle, whatever it is, that have to have a manure management plan.
Right, being regulated, but we still have an increasing problem with, it's obviously getting into our water system, drinking water, and so forth. So listening to you, it sounds like all is well, or are you just saying everything is going according to the way the law prescribes, and so that's where my worries end. Eldon.
Well, I'm sorry, Bill. I agree. You pretty much summed it up right there. Can I sit here and say we don't have issues with nitrates in the water? No, I can't say that. And we all, as a society, need to work on that. As a government, I guess All of us need to work on that. And I'm just saying, by law, the livestock producers with manure management plans are the ones being regulated right now as to how much they can put on. Other sources, not so much. And I think we all need to look at that, and I'm sure the policymakers will be doing that. The Iowa Pork Producers Association welcomes the opportunity to be involved in that. What we want, we just want everybody to understand how manure is currently regulated, and that, again, I know I've said this several times, but it's an asset. I represent crop farmers who have to buy commercial fertilizer. They will actually sell off a piece of land. They don't want to raise hogs themselves. They'll sell off a piece of land to have someone else put up a hog building, and other than getting paid for that 5 acres of land, the sole reason they do that is to get the manure. They want it. It's an asset. It is not a liability. It's a replacement for commercial fertilizer.
Isn't it? Help me understand here. It's an asset to a certain extent. If you can think of any number of things where they're desirable to have, but if you have them in excess, where they are polluting the environment, then you cannot describe them strictly as an asset, can you?
Well, and I understand that. I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is that by law, they are limited to how much they can put on. So if it is over-applied, any field that gets manure, if any commercial fertilizer is applied, there's a legal limit. If it's applied at more than that, that would be a violation of the law and should be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. The DNR did only 745 inspections. We have to think about, over 10,000 of these facilities. 745 inspections last year, 50 violations found. I wonder, is that adequate, given what's at stake with drinking water, for instance?
I guess here's the way I have to look at that. That's a lot of inspections and few violations. So that shows those that are being inspected, by far the majority are in compliance. Now, you could say all of them should be inspected every year. I don't think in any segment of our business world is a business, I shouldn't say any, but in most segments, the compliance is not checked every year by the governmental authority. You depend on a law being put in place, and you depend on inspections and the threat of an inspection to have compliance with that. And so, no, I don't think we can probably realistically inspect more than that every year, but I think that those inspections will continue. I've represented producers individually that have been the subject of those inspections, and I can tell you DNR does a very, very thorough job.
Eldon, I believe you watched this industry's legal landscape for decades now. I wonder, is today's version of this fight, if we use the word fight there, the satellite mapping and all, fundamentally different from the fights you were having 30 years ago? Or is it the same argument with some better tools with looking from satellite imagery?
Well, satellite imagery in some form or another has been around a while, as you know, so that is nothing new. And I'll try not to stray from your question here, but these operations that have been found that are not in the DNR database, we've been here before, folks. In 2007, there was a petition to remove DNR authority and give it to EPA. As a part of that, there was, starting in 2011, DNR spent 5 years, as directed by EPA, to map operations that they were aware of. And there was a front page Des Moines Register story from 2017 that said, DNR is discovered, and I don't have the number in front of me. All these operations we didn't know about. DNR then went to work and examined those, I'll use that term. And in the end, in 2019, the EPA issued a report or a letter approving of DNR's plan to identify those and determine if those operations were discharging, and commended the DNR for the job they have done. So we've been here before. Now, just because they aren't in DNR's database does not mean DNR does not necessarily know they exist. The field offices know where some of these buildings are. They're below 500 animal units, which by Iowa law is a small animal feeding operation. That distinction was made back in 95 when the first law was adopted to actually promote those small operations.
Just a few seconds left, please, Eldon. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. Finish up with your thought. I just wanted to let you know that we're almost done here.
I understand, and I can get carried away with this stuff. But the argument that these operations are just missing, they're out there doing their own thing, they have certain regulations they have to comply with, and if they are inspected because of a complaint or whatever and found in violation, they are dealt with.
Eldon McAfee, attorney representing the Iowa Pork Association. Thank you so much for coming in, Eldon.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Back with more River to River from IPR News, I'm Ben Kieffer. You've ever seen a chart, a poll number, or a scientific study translated into a graph? Well, there's a good chance the software behind it traces back to a small, mostly unpaid team of statisticians, including one right here in Iowa. Luke Tierney has spent 30 years helping build and maintain R. R is an open-source programming language that's become the default tool for statisticians, data journalists, and researchers around the globe. And this spring, that work earned Tierney and 4 collaborators the Rousseau Prize for Statistics. That's a new prize, but already prestigious award, sometimes described as the field's Nobel equivalent. It carries $1 million purse. He's received it just as he stepped into retirement from the University of Iowa. He joins us now. Luke Tierney, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Before we talk about what R is, take us back to the beginning of this for you, I guess the 90s. How does a math and economics guy like you end up building the tool an entire field now runs on?
Well, early on, I got interested in interactive graphics, and a lot of research companies had expensive equipment that you needed to play around with that, and I was interested in getting started on a Macintosh and started writing a programming language or building on a programming language, and that's my early experience. And then when Ross Ihaka and Rob Gentleman in New Zealand started on R, they knew about my experience and asked me to join them, and that's how I got involved in that.
I'm wondering, so in terms that we can understand, what is the challenge here, or multiple challenges, the chief challenges that you faced early on?
Well, getting people, there was a lot of interest in the kind of thing we were doing within academic statistics, in graduate programs and things. There was a language called S. It was developed by the research arm of the telephone monopoly called Bell Labs. And R basically re-implemented that with a lot of innovations, and original goal was to make it available for teaching undergraduate and graduates at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Just getting it off the ground took a little bit of time, but it's been pretty successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this prize, as I mentioned, sometimes called the Nobel Prize of Statistics. I wonder, Luke, is that framing feel right to you, considering what the prize actually recognizes?
I mean, it's certainly the most financially rewarding prize in the field. It's a relatively new prize, but it's well respected. I'm not quite sure I myself go as far as to say it's like the Nobel Prize, but I know a lot of people like to say that.
Yeah, it's interesting that I understand none of your team gets paid for this work. So you've been handed $1 million prize as a team for something you've always done as a volunteer?
Yes. Almost all of the people who worked on it initially were academics like myself. So we're not paid specifically to work on this, but we are paid to do research and scholarship in addition to teaching, and that's what some of us did as our scholarship. So it's,
Let's get down to what R, this language, actually does. Now, for someone who's never touched a line of code, what does R let a researcher do that couldn't have been done before?
There have been many, and still are many, tools for doing taking your data and crunching numbers. What a language like R lets you do is put together your own analyses and adapt your analyses to what the data needs. You don't have to rely on one company giving you a particular format of output from whatever you're doing. You could just be adaptive. And that's the advantage of having a language, being able to start. The language provides the basic building blocks, calculating a mean, calculating a standard deviation, but you have a language that lets you organize it into a display that's appropriate for your specific situation.
Mm-hmm. And so this language R is a foundation, and on top of that, there are packages, software packages that have been put on top of this core language for specific applications. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. When people develop new methodology or specific methodology for a problem, they'll often wrap it up into what's called a package. And it's written in R, but the package reflects the person who wrote it, their expertise in their area. And there are something like 24,000 packages now available for R that people have developed.
So if someone listening has never thought about statistics outside of, a sports broadcast, we just had the World Cup, it's a lot of statistics there, or a batting average, how would you explain what a statistician actually spends their day doing when we go a little bit more in depth?
There's two different. I mean, there's some develop new methodology, and but others who are working more directly with data usually will be collaborating with a scientist. Their goal as a statistician will be to work, basically try and separate signal from noise, help figure out what you can say from the data reliably, how much of uncertainty is left. Maybe if by doing a more clever analysis, you can reduce that uncertainty and get more out of your experimental data. That's the sort of thing statisticians do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you just joined us, Luke Tierney, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Statistics and Actuarial Science at the University of Iowa, a laureate of the Rousseau Prize for Statistics. So I would like a plain English example, and I'm going to just say, more for fun than anything, don't use the word code or algorithm in your answer, if you could. Luke, what's a plain English example of what R does that's something useful that we can really understand as non-statisticians?
Well, it takes, I'll have to use the word data. You start with some data you're trying to understand, and you want to get summaries. Often you'll break it down by sex, occupation, things like that. You want to compute those numbers. You want to visualize them in a way that makes it easy to assess whether differences are large or small, how reliable the differences are. And that's, for example, the kind of thing data journalists will use R for. They'll typically do some crunching of numbers and then build a visualization that they can include in an article.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we think about the way people normally use R without knowing it, I'm thinking about, a weather forecast, an election poll, a drug trial result. Those are all things likely built with the help of R without us knowing it?
Quite possibly. The analysis and the summaries that are behind reports to regulatory agencies and things like that, quite possibly will be done with R.
Mm-hmm. You've been at this for many decades. Obviously, it's been a passion of yours. It excites you. What is it that excites you most about this endeavor and has?
It's rewarding to see something that you put together, used by so many people. Most papers we write don't get read by that many people, but R is being used by millions of different people, and so and hopefully we're helping them by improving R, adding to it, fixing bugs. If we make a mistake, it kind of impacts a lot of people, so we try not to do that too often.
Yeah. R has been created, I'm thinking, mostly in a time without artificial intelligence, or has it crossed paths with artificial intelligence? Is that shaping it, the way it's used, or anything about it?
It has. There's certain areas where artificial intelligence is being heavily used to help people write R code, especially code for producing graphs, where the actual code can be very involved, but artificial intelligence tools can do a very good job of writing that for you. AI tools are also starting to be used in writing some of the extension package software. We haven't started using it in the internals of R yet, as far as I know, but we'll be looking into that before too long.
Mm-hmm. For you, generally speaking, or more to the point, to statisticians, you and others going through daily life, do you think, generally speaking, you see it any differently through some sort of statistical lens more than people who are non-statisticians do?
I think most of us are more conscious than non-people who haven't had some training of the uncertainties. You hear a number that often when it's reported comes out as if it's known with certainty, but usually it's not. So the question we'll often ask immediately is, okay, how sure are you of that number? And when you say that number is bigger than another one, do you really know either of them well enough to be confident about that? I think that skepticism is something that defines us.
So with that being said, I can imagine you listen to headlines, news, reading, watching, and you might maybe visibly shake your head and say, oh, I'm not sure if I trust that, professionally speaking. Does that happen a lot?
Yes.
Can you cite a recent example of where you see in the popular press, a statistic that runs away with the headlines, and you're saying, oh, come on, you've got to look at this a little more closely through my eyes?
Nothing jumps at nothing I can think. Give me 10 minutes, and I'm sure I could think of somebody.
Okay.
Nothing off the top of my head.
Okay, perhaps this way to ask the question. The biggest misconceptions, do those come in categories that those of us who use statistics, journalists as well, the biggest misconceptions that people have about statistics, do those fit into broad categories? Again,
I think it tends to be overconfidence in accuracy of things. Proportions that are calculated based on small numbers of samples, they just are not as reliable as people think they are. And I'd say that's probably the most common kind of misconception thing.
Mm-hmm. If you're at a gathering and a statistic comes up, do you, you probably disagree for the reasons you've just expressed. Do you keep quiet, or do you point that out?
It kind of depends on the gathering.
Yeah. Okay. What's something that statistics has taught you about uncertainty that has perhaps surprised you even after a career in the field? Is there anything that surprises you?
I'm not sure I can think of anything right off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, congratulations on this prize. You're retiring. You have retired. You're emeritus status now at the university. But I understand you're not retiring from R. Are you still working on that? Continue to do that?
I'm planning to continue working for a few more years. We're starting to look and be a little successful at finding some younger people to take over, and I'll start handing things off to others. But I'll keep doing things myself for another couple of years as long as my health lets me do that.
Yeah, we hope so. That's many years to come. So when you're looking for younger people to step into those shoes and take it to the next chapter, what sort of people make good statisticians?
People with good math skills, or people with, good math skills are essential, but people with a strong interest in science that is dependent on data usually make good statisticians. Just math alone is usually not, it's for some things it's enough, but it really helps if you have a strong interest in a science, social science or natural science that is heavily dependent on analyzing data, which most are, of course.
Mm-hmm. Does the team have an idea of what will be done with $1 million yet?
Not anything formal. One of the things that I know we would like to do for bringing in younger people is have the ability to buy out their time. If they're in academia, maybe buy them out from a course or something like that. So I expect a lot of the funding will go towards being able to do that, and that will help us bring new people in who,
I guess I'm not quite understanding, what does it mean to buy someone out from a course just so that they can devote their energy, their mental energy to what?
To working on our,
I see.
For those of us in academia, often just the time that we have that we can factor out from our regular research is not enough. But if we can buy out of a course, that would help. If somebody's in industry, we can pay for 20% of their time or something like that, then their employer will let them work 20% of their time on R. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Luke Tierney, thank you for coming in. I think you may be the first statistician I've interviewed. You maybe can tell that because I trip over statistician quite a bit. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Professor Emeritus in the Department of Statistics and Actuarial Science at the University of Iowa, a laureate of the Rousseau Prize for Statistics. Well, a new University of Iowa study finds wildfire smoke has quietly undone a decade of progress in air quality across the country. Air quality is our topic, of course, with all the smoke in the air. We'll talk to a number of experts on that as well. Today's program produced by Danny Gear. Technical help from Nev Kelly. I'm Ben Kieffer. Thanks for joining us.